Yeah, we've been seeing a lot of the stuff with like the Arri comparison, or not the comparison, but with the Arri log feature on it. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, is it a good enough B cam to be able to match with the A cam?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of cameras are good B cams to match with Arri. I think before the Lumix, Blackmagic was the talk of being a good B cam to match with Arri. But I think Lumix putting the actual Arri log C3 LUT in there was a really good staple and a really good push for them. To me, you know, before you color correct, there's still like a little bit more magenta. I do feel like the contrast and the blacks are a little way blacker. I think Arri does have like a better foundation before you even get into coloring, which is why it is an industry standard, because the color science is just so amazing. The skin tones, the highlight roll off. And I feel like those kind of things we don't talk about. It's just like color, but there's other aspects that go into play, such as the highlight roll off and like the skin tones, which of course we know certain things can be fixed, but having a good foundation is always, to me, important for like a workflow. But yeah, I think it was really good. Outside of that, like Brendan said, when you see it after it's color, it's kind of like, whoa. But when I first saw it, there was like a huge magenta shift in it, and that can be fixed. And as well as like, to me, the blacks were blackened. So like, you know, outside of like being able to color and things like that, it did really well. You know, we rigged it out, you know, to make sure that we can still, you know, have our first AC pull and focus, and to still use the PL lenses that we were using for the Arri. So like things like that, it was really, really great. So I don't think the goal is to say that this is an Arri killer, because it can never be an Arri killer. I don't think the goal is for it to be like, this can do everything your Arri does, because I don't agree with that either. But I do think it could be a crash cam. I do think it can be a B cam to the Arri.
That's really cool. Do you think it's the best one out right now as a B cam or can you say?
I think the push with this GH7 is the fact that it has Arri log C, you know, the LUT. I don't think there's anything else that's just like, this is why this is the perfect B cam for Arri. Because like I said, to me, when I've been on sets, Blackmagic and the colors and the highlight roll off, to me, it's a little closer in what you can get from it. So I don't know if it's the best personally for me. I think it having open gate and certain things like that is great, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's the best. I think you can find that in others, and I would hope that with this LUT that it's a firmware upgrade. Like I have the S5 X2 or 2X, the Lumix, and it has everything to me that I would look for that this GH7 has outside of that LUT. So I feel like if that's the only reason, I mean, like you said, color correction, and we've been doing it for so long that I don't know if that would be the reason why I would buy the GH7.
Definitely. Now, Brittney, I'm pretty sure you're a Sony shooter, right?
I do have a Sony.
Okay, yeah. But to be fair,
I do shoot on Sony.
to be fair, this woman, she's shooting on Arri. She's shooting on all of the major, most professional, you know, brands. When you look at her channel, she's very camera agnostic. I feel like she uses the best tool for that. So I guess with that being said, I feel like we already kind of have a flavor of what your answer will be. But for you, did the GH7 do enough to make you want to go out and buy it, or are you sticking with what you got?
I'm sticking with what I got. I feel like there's nothing different. Like I said, outside of the LUT being in it, there's nothing different that I'm like, oh, I need to get the GH7. I feel like if you're good where you're at, you're good. You can take a Sony, you could take a Blackmagic, and you can kind of get the look. Sony is a little bit more digital, so the sharpness may affect you a little differently, but personally, I was a Blackmagic lover before I was a Sony lover, and I think that the quality and the image that you got was so cinematic to me. It wasn't about like, I don't want to have to feel like I got to do too much to get to Arri. Like, I think that's why people like Arri, is because foundationally, you don't have to go crazy. And people are like, well, I can throw a pro miss and I can do this and I can do that. But like, why do I always have to get a good image? You know what I mean? So to me, Blackmagic straight out the gate gave me that. And so even when I was shooting behind the scenes on the Women King, they were using the Arri, I was using the Blackmagic. And if you look at that footage, you're like, whoa, this, I see it, I feel it. And so to me, I wouldn't go out and get the GH7. Also, there's things about the Lumix that I'm just kind of like, I actually have the Blackmagic 6K full frame, and I have the Lumix S5 2X. And just comparing those, they both have a lot of similarities, 6K open gate, things like that. It's something about the Lumix that it's just not for me, you know? And like you said, I've used a lot of cameras. I've toyed with a lot of cameras. As a DP, Arri is always going to be my top. I've played with I've shot with Sony Venice, but I'm just not, it's nothing that I'm like, ooh, the GH7. And I know a lot of people like it, Lumix overall, because you do get so much with their cameras. But after playing with the S5 2X, I realized that even though you get a lot of frame rates, there's like minuscule things that I'm just like, this doesn't make sense. Like the fact that you can only do, I don't even think you can do 4K at 48 frames per second. Or you can't do 60 at open gate. Like there's certain things that even though you get all of this stuff, it'd be the tiny things where you're like, this doesn't work for me. So to me, I rather get like what I need than you give me all of this stuff that I'm not going to use. So I know it's opposite of what you said, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I feel you on that. And this is what I realized with creators, and this is what I love, is everybody has different needs. Everybody wants different things. And the cool thing is, while, Brittney might be more towards Blackmagic and, staying with what she's got, the reality is the GH7 might have something that you want or that you need, and it makes sense for your workflow. Like definitely not down in the camera, but definitely in a place of just doesn't work, necessarily for her workflow. I will say this personally, no Lumix hate, but
no Lumix
the
hate.
GH7 is not for me, but I've said it a couple times. I'm excited for how they're pushing the industry, and I feel like, oh my goodness, like I want to see everybody doing crazy stuff, like just personally.
I just want to say there's like people who've had Lumix forever, and so I get it. Like having the S5 2X, I get it. And so yeah, there's no hate. I'm not a fan of micro four thirds. I've never had a camera that was micro four thirds. I learned on the shoot as I'm DPing, I'm always having to think. We have a whole Arri Mini LF, right? So I'm having to think, which lens are we using? Because, the Lumix is a micro four third. That really affected me on set as a DP, because I'm like, when you're on these big sets like this, you got to think about your focal lengths, think about the shot, and what lens is going to work for the shot that you're trying to get. And with the Arri, it was like, boom, put this lens on there. We was using the Atlas Mercury anamorphics. Put this lens on there, do this. And then with the GH7, it just messed up my mind mentally with the micro four thirds of like, I can't use the 54 because essentially it's not a 50, things like that where let's go back and use a 32 or a 48 so it can get to a 54, like things like that. It's a lot. And so I think you have to think about that as well, of like, if you're not in the Lumix and you never had a micro four thirds system, it is a learning curve, and it is something that you have to think about on a regular. What lens is going to work for that, And so me never owning one, I have all full frames. I have, EFs and Sony lenses, and I usually work on Super 35s and full frames. And so that was just a huge learning curve that just was affecting me on a regular of trying to like hustle and move throughout this shoot day.
Yeah. Break down one shot where you have the Alexa, right? And you're shooting something. What are you using the GH7 for as a B cam? Like, is it like just at an angle? Are you is it more of a tighter shot? Like break down something just so we can kind of give the chat kind of an idea of the challenges of mixing those focal lengths between the sensors.
Yeah, so for the most part, I always tried to keep the Arri at like the widers, unless we were only using A cam. So there were some shots where we only use A cam and we put the GH7, to rest for a quick second because some sites didn't need two cameras. So with that, I would go through all of the lens from close to wide with the Arri. But whenever we were using a GH7 for a B cam, I tried to look at that as being the closer shots because it's already a micro four thirds, so you're already punching in a lot more. And then with Arri, like for instance, the Atlas Mercury Anamorphics, I think we had the 132 or 138, but it was a shot that we really wanted, and we wanted to get even more tighter. Now we did have a 1.6 like adapter, but it still didn't get to give us like that super tight shot that we wanted. And so I told the director, Lucas, I was like, I think it'd be better to put this on a GH7 since it's already micro four thirds. So we already get a bigger punch and we're using a 138 and, we can add that 1.6, adapter on there. And so like stuff like that, where it was just like, we might as well, if we can, for the most part, when we're trying to get those really close shots, use the GH7 because it's already giving us that feel. And so that's what I tried to do for a lot of the times. But then other times it was, because the widest I think we had was probably like a 32 or something. So it wasn't as wide. So we did go with the Arri for some of those. So it was like going back and forth. But for the most part, when I was DPing for day one, I tried to look at it as for any of the super tight shots that we might need, if they go beyond what the Arri can give us, let's go with the micro four thirds just because it is a micro four thirds.